Open your ears and crack some beers. You are listening to the latest episode of Retro Hangover.
Retro and classic gamers, welcome to the podcast where we do diddly dingoes, doodling dongs, donning dukes. This is Retro Hangover. I am your co-host, Chris Copleen, with special guest, Patrick Arthur from the Retro Spectives Podcast. And, as always, your host, Shane. Hail to the Dick Dragon! Baby Koski.
Your face, your ass, it's all the same to me.
I heard a lot of that.
Hello, everybody.
I've heard that quite a bit in the past couple weeks when I could actually find some time.
Yeah, I'm sure you're probably sick of hearing it by now. Actually.
Not really. It's not that bad. We'll get into that. I'm sure we will. But hi, Shane. How are you doing? Hey.
Doing all right. You know, got some alien blasting action out of the way recently. So, you know, doing as good as one can.
It's always fun to blast. And how are you doing, Patrick? It's nice to have you on the show. I appreciate that you're being here. I'm glad that you made it past the intro, which apparently you think is trash.
Honestly, well, certainly I thought it was trash, but I got to say, hearing it live hits differently to hearing it blasting over my car radio when I've got someone in the car next to me. And I kind of have to pretend that neither of us heard it. But it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm a long-time listener of you guys, and I love your stuff. It did take me a while to get past that intro, I admit. But you always get into some really good discussion once you get past it. So I'm glad I stuck with it.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate that as well. I tell people it's an acquired taste, you know, but once you get over that speed bump, you know, it's all kind of smooth sailing from there. Or, you know, you could just skip past it. I know people that do that too.
Never skip past it. Never skip past it. Essential part of the experience.
It is.
I mean, I think that, but you know,
when we leave it in, people say that they move past it and they don't care for it. And then when we take it out, people are like, that was your identity.
Yeah.
You can never win.
Who even are you now?
That's the thing that defines you as a retro gaming podcast, Dick Dragon.
Evidently. Yeah. Which my wife has said on multiple occasions. She's just real enthused that's how her husband is known in a lot of circles, evidently. So.
But he is known, isn't he?
But you do know of me, yes.
All right, let's get this party started by doing what we usually do, as we are wont to do, by talking about the games we have been playing lately. Patrick, you're our guest this week, and guests always go first, so why don't you tell us what games you've been playing lately?
So apart from Duke 3D, which I've been playing over the last couple of weeks, the main game I've been playing recently is the one I'm doing for my upcoming podcast, which is a Polish turn-based tactics game called Gorky 17. It's a very weird game, very weird. It has some of the worst RPG systems in any tactics game I've ever played, but also has some of the most, I guess, interesting blend of survival horror with tactics. It's almost puzzle-like in its design. You control a small squad of characters and have to destroy these monstrosities. And a lot of the game is maneuvering so your guys never, ever get hit. And it's just got that bleak, nihilistic atmosphere I love from Slav games. Slav jank is secretly one of my favorite genres to indulge in. Games like Pathologic, Gorky 17, Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl. Yeah. All of these games kind of tap into a far more hostile gaming space than Western or even Japanese developers tend to do. And while those games are initially very difficult to get into, they're immensely rewarding once you get the head around them. Gorky 17, even though it's a bit of an awkward and clunky mess, still has aspects about it that are fascinating to engage with today.
Nice.
And I really think a lot of those games, we're missing a lot of those games in modern gaming. It's either something that people call terrible or something people call great. And just to have those B tier, C tier games being present in the gaming ephemera, you need those games, right? You just need games that aren't Great. And I do appreciate you guys playing these really esoteric games, which I've noticed on your show you've been playing a lot of lately, because I really haven't heard a lot of these games. So that's some good stuff, dude.
Yeah, one of the ones we've done fairly recently that really blew my mind is The Typing of the Dead. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that game.
Oh, yes.
We definitely have, yes.
Oh, you have? Have you played it for your show, or?
Not for, well, technically, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to think about that. I'm like, technically, no. I have played it, but we played House of the Dead, which is,
of course, yeah.
Overkill.
Typing of the Dead is a kind of game that it sounds like someone's making something up when you try and describe it to someone, but it's bloody brilliant. And yeah, it's really fun to play these older games that are a bit more free of, I guess, the hype or the remembered hype, because you get to just dive deep into what it is that works about these games and, also what doesn't work about them. But fantastic game. Enjoying Gorky 17 a lot. I'm looking forward to discussing it with my co-host.
Awesome, dude. I look forward to that episode. Shane, what have you been up to?
Oh, geez. All right. What have I been up to? Well, let's start by saying what I am no longer up to, which is I have officially given up on Diablo Immortal. I knew that it was going to be a little bit of like a pay to win trash fire right from the beginning, because it's a mobile game and it's also Activision Blizzard. So it's not really a shocker by any stretch. But here's the thing, man. I'm going to do a little bit more of an in-depth like RFR about this soon. But suffice to say, it has it's got good bones. Like, the game actually is fun to play. It's just trapped in this monetization model that is just choking the life out of it. And the last straw that caused me to quite literally hit escape and quit the game like immediately is when I went to the charm vendor, because you can pick up charms as items in the game. And I went to upgrade this charm to try to get a skill bonus that was relevant to my character, because, fun fact, the charms that you get roll random stat things that have nothing to do with your character more often than not, so they're useless. So you burn them for crafting materials, essentially. You can upgrade a charm to level 5, which gives you 5 different skill boosts, not guaranteed to be relevant to your character. Again, I need to impress that point upon everybody. And you have the ability to extract one of those skills from a charm and put it onto another one. Okay. So I went to the charm vendor and I was like, okay, I have mine that's equipped. It has 2 out of the 5 skills that are useful for me. The other 3 are trash. But I have this other one that has a skill that I want on it. So I'll extract it. I'll throw it on mine. And I'll slowly build this charm up to be what I want it to be. Seemed to make sense. Couple of caveats with that. One, the charm needs to be ranked all the way up to level 5 before you can extract something from it, which means you already have to burn a bunch of materials just to get it up to that point, which is stupid in the first place. And the thing that made me quit the game and not even look at it again was when I realized that when I hit the extract button on that charm, it did not allow me to select which skill I wanted to pull off of that charm and put on my other one. Oh no, it did a literal fucking roulette wheel on the skills that were listed on that charm and randomly selected one and put that on my other charm. So I replaced a shit tier useless skill boost with another shit tier skill boost and realized I would have to do that over and over and over again in hopes of maybe getting a skill boost I actually wanted. And that was the point where I was like, welp, fuck everything about this, and uninstalled the game. I removed it from my PC, uninstalled it from my phone, and said, I'm done. Because listen, man, everybody knows I'm a huge Diablo fan. I love ARPGs, but that's too much. That's just too much. And that in conjunction with all of the extremely predatory monetization that's going on in that game, I was just like, nope, all right, I'm out. So that was that. And then on the flip side of things, which is far more positive, some folks may or may not be aware that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge released this week at the time of us recording this episode. And so, of course, I bought it immediately. And it is a damn fine beat 'em up. I am having a lot of fun with that game. It's like Turtles in Time, but with 10, 15-ish some odd years worth of refinement and some stuff added to it that makes it
30.
A much more involved experience. Don't remind me how old I am. Just go with it. But yeah, I'm for $25, I am thoroughly impressed with that game. I'm having a lot of fun. There's a few quirks in the combat that I may not be a super fan of, but we'll talk about that at a later date.
I'm sure.
But yeah, so for right now, that's been the majority of my time was playing and then summarily dumping Diablo Immortal and then getting into some good old TMNT beat 'em up action. So what about you, Chris? Besides, fucking Lunar or whatever, what else have you been doing?
So I've been playing the Final Fantasy V 4-job Fiesta. At the time of this recording, I just unlocked my second job, which is Summoner. So I have Black Mage and Summoner. So I hope to God I get a physical attacker for a dungeon that is in the second half of the game. I don't know how far I'll be by the time this episode is released. If it's not complete, head over to our Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/retrohangover, and you might be able to catch me. But I might be done. I might not be done. It depends how much time I have. And I've not had a lot of time to really play games lately. I don't have a lot. So I guess I will also talk about Shredder's Revenge, because I did play that, as you did. And I'm sure that means the guidance coming up for our patrons. And I look forward to doing that.
Yeah.
But I actually share a lot of the same sentiment you do. I think it's a very good game. I'm impressed by it. I'm playing it on Game Pass, by the way, so I did not have to buy it, which I'm probably going to end up buying it anyway, getting that physical copy from Limited Run because I am a dumbass.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. I did play it with my son. Every single time I've played it with my youngest son, and me and him have just tore it up. We beat the story mode. We beat the arcade mode without ever having to continue. And we didn't play it on the easiest difficulty either. We played on normal difficulty and did it. I think we only died once or maybe twice each. So we did like really, really well.
Yeah.
And I was impressed with him being as competent as he is with that. He's probably better than me secretly. But I did have a higher score for what it's worth, so bragging rights are there.
These brawlers have had a bit of a resurgence in recent years. I played Streets of Rage 2 for the first time just last year, and while it took me a while to get the hang of, I ended up really enjoying it, even though there were some parts of that game which I think are complete bullshit. And Streets of Rage 4 came out not too long ago, right? Did you guys play that one as well?
I did.
Well, Chris definitely has. Yeah, I haven't yet.
Yes. So that's one of the things about Turtles Shredder's Revenge. It's made by the same team who made Streets of Rage 4. So you're getting a quality beat 'em up. Yeah. I don't think it's as good as Streets of Rage 4. I didn't think Streets of Rage 4 was as good as River City Girls, which is a fantastic beat 'em up. So, I mean, on a technical level, I think Turtles it's still a great game, but there are better beat 'em ups up there. But I know that, nothing can replace nostalgia. So I do think that if you're into beat 'em ups, if you're into Turtles, this is definitely a game worth going out and purchasing. But I'm sure that we'll talk about that more in detail on this show. I'm definitely thinking that's going to be a thing.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of episodes that we're recording, this is an episode we are recording. We're going to be talking about Duke Nukem 3D.
I can always rely on you for these fantastic segues, Chris. Thank you.
I do these in my sleep.
Very smooth.
Yes. It's an acquired talent, I guess. I don't know. But I know that Shane likes first-person shooters. So he likes the history of these, and I'm doing a terrible job and just kind of burying the headline.
You're waffling, Chris.
I'm definitely waffling.
So much
I love
waffling.
it. Just give me all the syrup and make me blue. So if
No, not allowed.
So for the brief history, Shane's going to take it away. So Shane, how about you give us the brief history of Duke Nukem 3D?
You know what's a great game? Doom. This is probably not much of a revelation, particularly if you've listened to the show. After all, we have covered a couple of id Software's efforts, including the demon-blasting daddy of modern FPSs itself. Though their shadow loomed large, id Software wasn't the only developer interested in making first-person shooters. After all, Doom's massive success would inevitably inspire copycats looking to cash in on the craze. In 1995, seeing the immediate hit that was Doom and having published the game's relatively less successful but no less significant predecessor, Wolfenstein 3D, 3D Realms, formerly Apogee Software Productions, wanted back in on the FPS action. While no actual member of id Software would be part of the development process, their signature over-the-top style and knack for pushing the envelope in regards to what was deemed appropriate would be on full display. The game would be based off a 2D action platformer for MS-DOS called Duke Nukem. Given that this title would be presented in a fully three-dimensional environment, the team would put all of their creative juices together to give it the moniker Duke Nukem 3D. Starting with a budget of $300,000 and a team of merely 8 people, the game was initially intended to be both a first and third-person shooter. When that proved to be a bit more ambitious than practical, the team decided to focus exclusively on a first-person perspective. The vision for Duke would be to have the game take place in more realistic locations, such as movie theaters, bookstores, and strip clubs, in an intentional departure from the more exotic and, in some cases, fantastical locales of its contemporaries. Duke Nukem 3D would find its way to shareware on January 29th of 1996. As was common at the time, this version included only the first episode. The full Duke experience would descend upon the gaming masses on May 5th of that same year, accompanied by a live stream of the packing and shipping process, an event that, in retrospect, was far ahead of its time. Duke 3D would be an instant commercial and critical success, with many PC gaming outlets considering it a better shooter than even Doom. While many critics were keen to point out the game's more controversial material, most, if not all, of them seemed to either enjoy it or not take much notice of it at all. Unfortunately, the same could not be said of all people who saw Duke's release, as many social activists claimed that the game promoted pornography and murder. This caused 3D Realms to create censored versions of the game for various regions, including Australia and Germany, with the title being simply banned outright in Brazil. Additionally, the Walmart chain of stores refused to stock Duke on its shelves unless it was heavily censored. However, keeping with the id Software-inspired spirit of giving the proverbial middle finger to any and all detractors, 3D Realms would release a patch that unlocked all of the censored content, made available for download via their website.
Rest in pieces. Come get some.
Duke Nukem would be successful enough to see expansion packs and ports across a multitude of home consoles, including the Nintendo 64, Sony PlayStation, and the Sega Saturn, and continues to see ports even to this day. It is estimated that the game has sold a total of 3.5 million units worldwide, and continues to see remakes and remasters on digital distribution platforms. While it may no longer be considered to be better than the game it took inspiration from, there is no doubt that Duke 3D deserves a prestigious spot in the pantheon of early first-person shooters. And that is your brief history of Duke Nukem 3D.
Thank you so much for that brief history, Shane. I know that it must hurt you to see that reviewers thought this game was better than Doom back in 1996. That's almost blasphemy, which I guess is fitting for a Doom game.
No, there's no almost about it. That's fucking heresy. It's, yeah.
I don't know.
What?
So the thing about Doom is that Doom is several different games. I mean, I would consider Doom 1 Episode 1 to be a masterpiece beyond reproach, but I do think episodes 2 and 3 do drop off a bit. And I do think that, for me at least, Duke 3D does pip specifically Doom 1 episodes 2 and 3.
I could probably see that. I think, although interestingly, and we'll get into this more in a little bit, but now that you mentioned that, I feel like Duke Nukem is actually the inverse, if you will, of Doom.
Yeah.
In that I think it actually gets better the further you get into it.
Yeah, it's hard to look at these games just in terms. It's hard to look at the games as a whole because there's such a variable quality from episode to episode. I mean, these games were shareware games at the time they were released. And so the developers learned so much between the episodes.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, especially because, I mean, you have a couple more months to polish up episodes 2 and 3 in Duke Nukem's case. So, like, yeah, your first effort out there, and you'd think your first effort would be your best effort if you're just sending out samples for people to try. I mean, you do want them to, obviously, the remaining episodes to be good, so people just don't be like, just play the free version and the rest of it doesn't matter. But as you said, like, Doom shareware episode 1 being the best, and I think you could actually say the same about Wolfenstein, where this all kind of started. Yeah, it's understandable, and for Duke to actually get better as it goes along, that's actually, I think, a good move. Now, in terms of personal experiences, as we get into this, I'll just kick this off myself because I know I'm not going to have a story, really. I just know that it was a game that existed. And the first time I played it was recently because somehow I managed to avoid it, even with all my preteen and teenage angst back in the late 90s and early 2000s. I don't know how I avoided it because this seems like the perfect game for someone like myself, but I did. So there was that. I just knew it existed. It was around. I think I knew less about it than Doom. So I'll let Patrick take the last word on the personal experiences here, and I'll shift it over to Shane. Shane, what are your personal experiences with Duke Nukem?
Well,
3D?
It may, clarify that, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, it may come as a surprise to listeners who are familiar with my, repertoire, as I am evidently the FPS guy for RHP, such as it is. But I actually didn't really get into this for quite a while. My memory of when I first played the game is pretty hazy. I'm not sure when that actually occurred, but it certainly was not on release. I mean, that would have put me at about 10 years old at the time, and my parents sure as hell would not have purchased this for me. So that didn't happen. And at any rate, I was a huge Doom fan. I mean, still am. So any PC FPS time that I would have had would have been solely spent with Doom for quite some time. However, having said that, I was acutely aware of Duke Nukem's existence. I did have a pretty long running subscription to PC Gamer magazine. And so, of course, they had a lot of coverage in there. And, then the the long and painful road to finally getting to Duke Nukem Forever was something that was covered exhaustively in those sorts of publications. So I was aware of Duke. I want to say that the first time I played this, more likely than not, was on a pirated copy that I probably borrowed from a friend. So, sorry, 3D Realms, but that's just how things tended to happen.
That's just PC gaming, man.
Yeah, I say we all had binders of discs with Sharpies on them.
For me, it was Warcraft 3. I don't know how many copies of Warcraft 3 were circulated amongst our school, but none of them had been purchased.
Yeah, you've got a burnable disc and then a little slip of paper with a CD key on it.
Or you just randomly type in a bunch of combination of letters and numbers and it'll work, which is what I tended to do.
Or you live dangerously and go find a CD key crack program off LimeWire or some shit and hope for the best.
That works too. So Patrick, what was it like for you? Did you play Doom when it first came out, or was it a little bit later?
Doom, you say?
Yeah, so
Duke. I said Duke. Did I say Doom?
Yeah, Doom, Duke 3D, they're all the same. I played all these games. Unlike most people, I didn't have a console at home. My dad was a giga nerd, and so he was into PC gaming. So for me, PC gaming is how I interacted with video games growing up pretty much exclusively until I got a fair bit older and was able to purchase my own console. And Duke 3D, of those games when I was growing up, was probably the most important. I would say this is the primary game alongside Red Alert that I played from ages like 6 to 10. Clearly, my dad didn't give a shit about the content in this game.
No.
Because I used to jump on and play it. And I played this game so much. I played over the internet against one of my dad's friend's son because he was about the same age as me. And this was back when dial-up internet was a thing. So it was just both of us kind of like running around the single player map shooting one another. And it's made such an impression on me that this is the first time really I fired up Duke 3D for like 20 years. I remembered most of the levels and secrets, and it's been 20 years since I played it. So this is one game that I do have a lot of nostalgia for, and I'm going to do my best to try and take off those goggles and give this game a fair critique. But it is a bit difficult because I kind of knew exactly what to do and where all these ridiculous secrets were the moment I dropped into a level, despite it being so long.
You can keep some nostalgia goggles on for this. It's because I know your show,
okay.
you go completely nostalgia glasses off, which is great, by the way. I think we don't have enough podcasts like that, like Shane said when he was on your show for Diablo. So you could keep them on a little bit.
I'll keep them on slanted, so I've got one eye.
There you go.
I'll say, if for nothing else, I feel like Chris and I will probably serve as a foil for you for most of this episode. So, keep those glasses on. It's fine.
I will. keep my delusions safe. No, I will. But yeah, so one of the formative games ever since I played this game, although I'd played Doom beforehand, Duke 3D was the one that really spoke to me and something I really got into. And I think that its take on level design in particular is something that I feel like we should aspire more towards, and something that unfortunately a lot of modern games have kind of forgotten.
Well, I'm going to want to know more about that in a little bit.
What we do want to know about is this game's plot, the writing, what's going on in this game. So Shane,
yeah,
you kick this one off. What do you think of what's going on in the world of Duke Nukem 3D?
I mean, listen, man, it's pretty typical early FPS kind of fare, right? I mean, badass lone gunman kills a bajillion things to save the world. And in this case, also all the babes. So it's got that going for it. What is there to say? I mean, I'm sure Patrick can probably expand on this a little bit, but I mean, there's not a whole lot to say about the plot of a early to mid 90s first person shooter. It's really just a scaffolding to hang your justification for blowing away 1,000 different things, right? So it's there. That's what I can say about it. I mean, as far as the writing goes, I mean, listen, man, the game's very self-aware. It has to be, but it is. 3D Realms knew what they were doing. A lot of the one-liners that Duke spouts off, just sort of randomly, or when you're picking up a weapon or blowing something up with a rocket launcher or something, gonna be honest, a lot of them kind of cringy. But then again, I think they were always intended to be. I mean, part of what, gives Duke Nukem his, let's go with charm, is the fact that he is very much a parody or a lampooning of a lot of, late 80s and early 90s action heroes. It's very much a send up of that kind of thing. And so to me, it always felt like a very like They Live kind of style of B movie action hero. And they really leaned into that for this. So, yeah, I mean, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, I guess what I'd add to that is that while the plot is absolutely ridiculous, I would say that rather than saving the world, that's something that incidentally happens as Duke Nukem is trying to save babes. That's really his driving motivation. I will say that I think that the world building and atmosphere is something I do enjoy about this game. When you said a lot of the things he says are cringy and ridiculous, a lot of them are direct references to John Carpenter and Sam Raimi films. They Live. A lot of the John Carpenter films like Escape from New York, Big Trouble in Little Chinatown, Evil Dead. It really taps into that kind of pulpy 80s and early 90s flicks, which I kind of have a soft spot for those films. So I kind of enjoy that. My favorite line that he spits out is always, "I'm here to kick ass and chew bubble gum."
Yes.
And I'm all out of gum.
Yeah.
Is that the Evil Dead? The one where the monsters are in society and he puts
No,
on
that's
special
They
glasses?
Live.
That's They Live.
Yeah.
They Live. That's from
Yeah.
They Live, of course. How could I get that wrong? The other thing I'd say is that I don't know if you guys have ever played a game called Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines.
I have.
I have not.
Yeah, so that game is also set in Los Angeles. And while the depiction of Duke Nukem 3D's world is baseline level immature and ridiculous and leans into titillation, I do enjoy the idea of depicting the seedier side, the nighttime undercover side of Los Angeles, because, back in the 80s and 90s, it was a seedy place.
Sure.
And I think that in the same way that the John Carpenter and Sam Raimi films kind of lean into this kind of darker undercover side of the cityscape, I think Duke Nukem 3D does as well. And I appreciate a take on this landscape, even if it isn't as sophisticated as Vampire, not even close.
Mm-hmm. See, I love everything about this. I think just like you guys, I really appreciate it, but I think for slightly different reasons, because I love how over the top it is. Mm-hmm. I love Duke's machismo. I like him just being this totally balls out, over the top Johnny Bravo type of dude. Like, it's so much better and it's so refreshing compared to what other types of games were doing during that time period. In particular, like Doom, because it's like a space marine. So there's not a lot of personality, even with Blazkowicz in Wolfenstein 3D. It's not a lot of personality. You have a POW and you have a space marine, and then you get to Duke and he's just some buff dude who just likes chicks and just gives random women money to strip for him or whatever. It's just like, it's so over the top and it's so immature that it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, I think it becomes more and more ridiculous the further and further you get away from it. And I think you made a good point about it being a B-movie action type hero, but I think it even devolves into more of that. This is like a Hot Shots version of the B-movie action hero. It's like taking the piss out of it 100%.
Yeah.
And if you're not viewing it in that lens, I can understand if you get offended by it, and you know what, good for you, be offended. I don't care, because this game is just, it feels like it's supposed to be ridiculous. It feels like it's supposed to make you laugh about how stupid Duke is. And just like all the women all over the place and dancing bikinis and like seeing porn booths when you go into the cinema and stuff like that. These are things that you didn't get back then, but you weren't going to. There wasn't going to be a serious take on this. You weren't supposed to be like, oh, this is so hot. There's some chicks dancing in a bikini. I'm totally going to take it out and start spanking it. That's not what it was supposed to do.
I mean,
you were supposed to be like, this is dumb.
To be fair, I am sure that happened.
Oh, I am too. Like that totally happened. Like, people are like, I play this game because there's like half naked babes in it.
You're like,
okay.
I never made it past the strip club level.
My only problem with this, because I agree with you guys, I think that having that stuff is actually mainly played for laughs, is that, and this is the same problem I had with Vampire, is that there's not enough dongs.
Right.
If you're going to have chicks getting their tits out, sure, great. But then you also need guys getting their dongs out. And then suddenly the issues of sexism disappear. It stops being about a man's fantasy and suddenly we get, a CIS male's fantasy, and starts being more of a, generic fantasy for anyone to indulge in. So I kind of feel like this issue could have been solved if there were just as many male strippers as there were female strippers, and problem solved, and suddenly the controversy goes away to a large degree.
I want the space pigs with their dicks out.
I was gonna say, I love the take that like activists would have been quelled had there just been more dicks in this game. It's brilliant.
I feel like modern criticism of this game would have largely been quelled. Perhaps the activists of the time, maybe not. But I think that I think there's room in video games to have a degree of titillation, but it needs to be equitable. It can't just be women getting their tits out. It needs to be men getting their junk out as well. And I think that as long as we can all agree on that, I think most people would agree on that. Game of Thrones has a lot of titillation, but at least it's got titillation for both men and women and people of any sexual preference.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
If a woman like takes off her bra and all of a sudden two dongs pop out, I think
It's suddenly more reasonable.
Yeah.
It's very reasonable. Oh, what have we become? Let's move on to gameplay.
Nothing we weren't already, Chris.
Exactly.
You know what? You're right. We always do this. What am I talking about?
Our last episode was Dragon Wang. Come on.
So if you want your dongs, go back.
That's right.
All right. So let's talk about, speaking of dongs, how does this control? How do the joysticks apply? Fuck me.
Right. Joysticks, of course.
Yes. Patrick, how about you talk about the gameplay a bit? Because you were mentioning earlier how you think the level design is really good, but of course there's more to this game than just level design. So how did you feel about this game and how it played overall?
Oh, okay. I guess a good place to start is probably, as you say, let's start with the basic controls, how it feels to like move your character around. And I have to say, this is something I've always enjoyed about these build engine games, whether it's Blood, Duke 3D. I haven't played Shadow Warrior. It's definitely on my list. So basically, your base movement speed is really high. You glide around the levels very quickly with no resistance on your movement. I don't know if I have always sprint on or if that's just how the game speed is. And also, you jump extremely high in this game. I don't know if that's something you guys noticed, but you can ascend levels very, very easily. And I got to say, I think this game still feels great to control and move around at a baseline level. Something that a lot of modern games do moving forward, particularly as you start getting into your Call of Duties and your more realistic shooters in the early 2000s, is that they dramatically restrict your movement speed and your ability to move around levels. I've always loved this about these old shooters. They did not give a crap how fast you move through the levels. And you can see that in the speed runs where they get through these levels in, 5 to 10 seconds just by abusing the strafing movement speed. Did you guys feel this felt good to control and move around at a baseline level?
Yes, absolutely.
I would say yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Felt really good.
I totally agree with you that a lot of these games built on top of the build engine, they all feel like this. They all feel real good. They're real snappy, very responsive. And in a game like this, you would expect it to be. I'm always very pleased with that. By the way, Shadow Warrior is also a quality one. So, you'll look forward to playing that.
I need to play it. I'm eager to.
Yeah, I totally agree with the movement and things like that. By the way, I think by default, run is always on. You can toggle it off. I actually did it accidentally while I was playing because you can just walk by holding shift. And I was just like, oh, I'm never doing that again. And
what's the purpose?
Right. Like, why is it even there?
There's no stealth in this game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, other than a few areas where you need to get through some tight tight corridors or whatever, I'm like, why is there even a crouch? Like, I just need to run and jump. That's all a man really needs. I would say, and I'm interested on your take on this, while the movement and control in that regard, I feel is very fluid, super responsive, really nice. The gunplay to me honestly doesn't feel as great. And I have some thoughts on that, but I'm curious what your take is.
I basically agree. This is one of the things where my memory clashed with the reality of playing it. I think that the weapons are solid. I don't think they're good. They're certainly nowhere as enjoyable to play with as in Blood, the other big build engine shooter. I played that for the first time the last couple of years and I absolutely adored it. The guns in that game kick ass. This is a far more medium roster of weapons. The shotgun and the chain gun feel okay to use. The explosive weapons, the RPG and the Devastator feel pretty good. The pipe bombs feel like a shitty version of Blood's TNT, and the Shrink is just a kind of generic utility weapon. The other two weapons, the Freezer and the Trip Mines, I didn't even use. I was struggling to come up with a situation where I used.
Same.
So I would describe this weapon roster as decently solid, not nearly as imaginative as I remembered, but a bit disappointing, honestly. I think it does the job, but I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't heap any more praise on it than that.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised. I think you and I agree on just about everything there. I felt like there was this real lack of oomph in a lot of the guns, and it's something that's difficult to quantify, right? But there's a certain something, and usually this is done in conjunction with like good sound effect work, which we'll get to in a little bit. That kind of makes the weapons feel more impactful, and honestly, I just really wasn't seeing that here. It felt very floaty, I think, for a lack of better terms, and it probably doesn't help that like even the pig cops felt like bullet sponges, like in most cases. And keep in mind, by the way, I was playing this on easy. And even then, those enemies, which are basically like second tier, they're like the second thing that you see, often take anywhere between 2 to 4 shotgun blasts to dispatch in most cases. And that's just too much. And that's like a through line through, I think, a lot of the game, where it just felt like what you were doing was not nearly as impactful as what they were, because a lot of the encounters start to feel unfair. since a lot of enemies, particularly the ones a little bit later in the game that have chain guns, seem to abuse the shit out of hit scanning, and you will get hit probably before you even have a chance to react in most scenarios. And to me, that just never felt great. I suppose I should probably note that it almost seems like 3D Realms was kind of aware of this in some regard, that it felt like they were sort of compensating with fairly plentiful health kits / atomic health boosters. Yeah, pretty much like all over the place.
There's shitloads of them.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is not an excuse for what could arguably be called like just a poor design choice. It feels like it's more of a Band-Aid than anything. But I don't know. Chris, you haven't really said a lot about this yet. What were your thoughts on this?
Just to address the health, I think that was something that a lot of the early first-person shooters were really struggling with, just because they hadn't figured out the regenerative health technique quite yet. Because Halo was a ways off, and Call of Duty, of course, was a ways off. So you want to have challenging gameplay while also making sure the player knew that nothing was impossible, especially with the damages that you were taking. So I kind of look at those space pigs, and I feel exactly the same way, that if you're really up close to them with a shotgun, they still take 2 shotgun blasts, but so do you, but it doesn't change with the distance. And you'd think that if you're really up close in their face with a shotgun, they should go down in one hit. And that's pretty much the best way to do it, because you're not going to attack them with an RPG. You're not going to really attack them with a chain gun up close, because I guess it kind of makes sense, because one thing I did like is that with the pistol, like if you shot them with the pistol a bunch of times, they had kind of a reaction to it, so it kept them from shooting. So that is a benefit to that. So there is a tactic to it if you really want to go that route. But again, like a shotgun blast to the face really up close to a pig cop should kill them in one hit, and it doesn't. My biggest issue with the gunplay is just how precise you have to be with a lot of these weapons. Because I'm playing the 20th anniversary edition, even had auto aim. And again, I was playing on easy mode. So I have no idea how this was back in 1996, but if Quake is any indicator where you had to press buttons to look up and down as opposed to using the mouse to do so, it probably was a bigger pain in the ass. And I played it on the Saturn, and it had that kind of design where one button was look up and one button was look down. And that, it makes aiming a big problem. So if that was the case back then, there was a way that you had to get good at it. Again, I don't know, because I played a game that was optimized to be with modern controls in mind. But the precision of which that you have to have in order to shoot enemies is damn near infuriating. Now, your RPG, that can fucking take care of enemies no matter what. Like, they're in a blast radius, you're going to take care of them. But I shouldn't have to be precise with a goddamn shotgun. You do not need to be surgical with one. So why is it if I'm with a pig cop and or any enemy, whatever that might be, I have to be pretty much on target to hit the motherfucker when a shotgun spreads? Like, the further away it gets, I should be able to do damage to it, but it doesn't seem to be the case. And this is like the preferred weapon, I think, of Duke Nukem, just because of the damage that it does. I didn't understand why it would need to do this, because I kept swapping back between a mouse and a controller to see what I preferred the most. The Xbox 360 one and the mouse, and just nothing really seemed to feel right. And that was part of my biggest problem with this game, is that no matter what I tried to do with the gunplay, it didn't feel like I was the badass Duke Nukem that the game told me I was, where I could just mow down enemies mindlessly. There was significant challenge that was boosted by the health pickups, but I felt like in a design like this, something should have been a little bit more empowering, especially on an easier difficulty. I should have been able to mow down enemies. And I understand on the higher difficulties, that's not the case, but I don't know why it wasn't like that top to bottom on an easier one.
It's pretty interesting how challenging you found it. I was playing on Come Get Some, which is the equivalent of, ultra violence. So the level down from the top one. And I found this game bit more challenging than I expected, but not even close to what Blood is like. Blood has a lot of hit scanners, and those hit scanners acquisition time is like close to instantaneous. I found the acquisition times on these enemies was far more reasonable. The pig cops and the chain gunners gave me more time to actually react to them. I guess strategically, the way I had to fight my way through these levels and deal with these hit scanners was that it was a lot of crouching and sliding around corners, taking a shot, and then immediately ducking back into cover. If you try to run around in the open like you would in Quake or Dusk, you're going to die. Like there's no way you can be, as you perhaps alluded to, like playing like the badass action hero, jumping around, shooting enemies, because so many of the enemies are hit scan based. You have to play a lot more cautiously and tactically. And I can see how that would perhaps go against Duke's action hero image. But I think that as long as you play with a degree of care, I don't know if you guys use the pipe bombs very much, but pipe bombs are a fantastic way to clear enemies out while staying in safety. If you're doing a lot of that corner peeking, you should be able to get through this game without too much trouble, apart from when you start getting into some of the devastating ambushes that start cropping up in episode 3.
I just wanted to remind everybody I'm terrible at first-person shooter games. By the way.
That is true. Yeah, and actually, you make a good point, Patrick, because I think that's part of the issue, at least for me, is that I perhaps stubbornly wanted to approach this game like I would something like Doom, where you are very much encouraged to just run into a room and like strafe your way to victory.
Yeah, circle strafing is cover.
Exactly.
Fast movement speed protects you.
Yeah, and I wanted to approach this game the same way because, to Chris's point, that was part of the selling point of Duke, right? And to take, I guess if we want to use 80s action heroes as an example, or let's say early Rambo, because things went off the fucking rails later. But early Rambo approach of like being a little bit more tactical in how you're approaching your combat scenarios, that seemed completely antithetical to what they were trying to pitch Duke as.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe that's on me, right? Like I said, maybe I was just being stubborn and I was like, no, fuck you. I'm going to play this game the way that I think it should be played, to the sound of my death on various occasions, even on easy difficulty. So yeah, it's an interesting viewpoint on it for sure. I will say, on a little bit more of a positive note, and I feel like I think both of you will mostly agree with this. The introduction of the sort of rudimentary item inventory here was definitely a welcomed enhancement. So rather than just immediately using an item like the EV suits in Doom, for example, where if you pick one up when you didn't mean to, well, you better fucking make use of it because it's on and there's nothing you can do about it. Being able to store those items away and use them when necessary, like scuba gear for the underwater sections or your protective boots for traversing things like acid or lava, that was fantastic. I mean, having that, plus also partially having to do with compensating for some of those cheap shots from enemies, having the ability to carry a med kit with you and use it when you needed it rather than trying to track down a med kit somewhere, also super helpful.
Yeah, and my favorite of these items is without a doubt the jetpack.
I
feel like the jetpack breaks the level design in half, but the creators don't give a shit because it's fun to use.
Absolutely.
And being able to access secrets and sequence break these levels to some degree because you can just fly anywhere on the level is brilliant. The inclusion of the jetpack is precisely the kind of thing that a lot of modern game designers will move away from because it will break their scripting. You know, it's like They have a bunch of these cool things to show you, and if they just let you go anywhere and break the 3D spaces, we wouldn't be able to show you this pretty cinematic set piece that we've got prepared for you. Duke 3D and these far more old school design is like, well, we don't have a lot of scripting. We've just created this level and we don't really care if you do it back to front. You're going to experience it no matter what. And it just gives you the freedom to engage with these levels in different ways than you would think would be possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And at this time, having that jetpack, that one thing, and unfortunately it's of limited use because I feel like I really wanted to just have it all the time. But it did give you this real unprecedented level of, sort of exploratory freedom, which I think is great.
I would tend to agree with that, too. I mean, the jetpack, the items in general are something I didn't really care about much at all. I mean, you could even see this when I went to the Saturn version. I don't even think they had NVGs in the Saturn version because I don't know. But a lot of the items themselves, I liked more like the automatic ones, of course, like the scuba gear and the boots, because I didn't have to think about it. They just automatically happened.
Sure.
But yeah, when you have something like the jetpack and you can break the game, that does make the game a hell of a lot more entertaining. And it was something you didn't see in Doom. And I think that a lot of that too is because this was a fully 3D game, and it beat Quake to the punch, really.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I don't know if you know much about the build engine. Yeah. They call it 2.5D, so it's not quite 3D, but it does the illusion of 3D sufficiently well to trick you into thinking it is 3D.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. But what I'm saying is like in Doom, you don't really have to worry about aiming up or down at your enemies, whereas as opposed to Duke, you do. Like everything is on, it has a Y-axis. Doom does, but not in the same way that you really have to worry about it. You point, you shoot, you take care of business. You do have to be precise.
The enemies have infinite hitboxes. The enemies' hitboxes in Doom stretch to the sky. So as long as you're hitting somewhere above that hitbox, the enemy will get hit.
Right.
Exactly. That's not the case in Duke Nukem. So you have to be a lot more cognizant of what's going on. What I do want to talk about, and this is where we're getting into the level design, which you said is good. And this is what infuriates me about these early first-person shooters. This includes like all of them, by the way. This isn't just limited to Duke Nukem 3D, but it's here in Duke Nukem 3D. And I'm going to say that it still pisses me off, is how the level is gated off constantly via access cards and via switches that you need to press and you need to find, you need to do. The reason I don't like this is if you miss something, if you happen to not find a certain item that will allow you to progress through the level and you get lost, you're going to be spending a lot of time just wandering through the level where it's empty and there's nothing there. And it becomes boring quick and it becomes frustrating because you're already lost. You don't know what to do. You see you need to find an access card. You don't know where the access card is. Or you see a door that you need to go through and you know it requires a switch and you don't know where the switch is. So you're spending a lot of time not doing anything, hoping to find out what you're supposed to do. And until you find out what you're supposed to do, it's a whole lot of, I fucking hate this shit. So I understand if you know what to do, why you would love it. But I want you to, because you said it was great. So I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, Patrick. I want you to explain to me why the level design is great for someone who has never played this before and maybe someone who is just not in love with early first-person shooters.
Oh, yeah. So honestly, you bring up a fantastic point. Because the truth is, you know how I said I remembered most of the levels from 20 years ago when I played them? That includes, I remembered most of the keycard locations. And playing through it, there were some which were in fairly obscure spots, like almost behind secrets in some instances. And I can see how that would be immensely frustrating. So fair point. And the fact that I didn't have to deal with that bloody keycard hunt that you guys probably did meant that it's something that I overlooked. I guess the main reason I elevate Duke 3D's level design and the main reason I think that it's fantastic is basically due to the compact nature of it. I don't know if you guys have ever played Doom Plutonia Experiment, the one that came out as part of Final Doom in 1996.
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Yeah, so Plutonia Experiment is my favorite mainline Doom game. It's absolutely ball busting. But the thing that Plutonia Experiment does so well is that it realized that you didn't need to make levels massive. You didn't need to make these really big, huge, open, empty levels in order to deliver an enjoyable level design experience. You just needed to be very careful and particular in how you design those experiences and fill them with lots of dense stuff in the level. So lots of enemies and lots of environmental features. And they packed a challenging and enjoyable experience in a small space. And listen, going back to it, there were levels in Plutonia Experiment where I didn't know where the key was and I was wandering around frustrated after I'd cleared out the level. So I think your point is very well taken in that regard. What I like about this level design is that it kind of has this looping aspect to it. You like, for example, with Hotel Hell, one of the levels in episode 3, you kind of start at the back part of the hotel. You go out, another sideways corridor, come in back through the front entrance, go up a lift, then you go out a window back to where you started. And you've managed to, I guess, have a fairly compact space that is nonetheless filled with enemies and interesting encounters. And I never got lost in terms of where I was situated in the level. That said, listen, great point. I think that the keycard thing, if you don't know where they are, can lead to a lot of frustrating wandering about. So that's where I'd be. I think that the concept of a tight and dense level is preserved throughout Duke 3D. Can the keycard hunts be frustrating? Could they have been more obvious? Absolutely.
Yeah, and it is a good point because so there's a couple of things that I wanted to touch on about the level design in this game, and I suppose I'll start with Chris's point about hunting for things. I experienced this as well, and it's not something that's unique to Duke, as you've pointed out, Patrick. Like it happens in a lot of these boomer shooters, as they are called now.
Boomer.
So it's not unique to Duke, but I will say what does set Duke apart, and not in a good way, from some of its contemporaries in this regard is the thing that you actually mentioned, Patrick, is that for some godforsaken reason, they decided that it would be a good idea to put critical components of progression through a level behind what any other game would consider to be a secret.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a number of times where I came across that I quite literally was sitting at my computer and going, really? That's what you went with. There was one level, and I can't recall exactly which one it was now. I think it was in the first episode, the latter part of the first episode, but the only path forward was hidden behind a poster on a wall. In one particular room, there was a passageway. Mm-hmm. And not only that, because I went through that poster, I found it, and I was like, oh, this is a little secret area. They got some pipe bombs and stuff. That's neat. And then I left, and I was wandering around that level for like 15 more minutes with nothing to do. And I'm like, what am I missing? I have all the keys. I've been everywhere. I tried to use my mini map to figure out, did I miss a corridor? Like what's going on? And finally I had to look it up, and it's like, oh yeah, go through that poster thing, go down there. And then the reason they gave you pipe bombs is because they want you to blow up the wall, and then you keep going. And that's how you finish the level. And I'm like, you've got to be fucking kidding me.
It's very funny you use that as your example, because I think it's maybe one of the weaker ones, and you're just, a terrible human being that hasn't watched The Shawshank Redemption.
I have, but I certainly wasn't making a connection to that while playing Duke Nukem 3D.
What? You missed the part of the movie where Dufresne got the pipe bombs and blew up the wall. I swear that was in the movie.
It was. But again, like, okay, maybe perhaps this is part of coming back to this game a couple decades later or something. Mm-hmm. That movie was not exactly top of fucking mind when I was playing Duke Nukem, So, but I suppose you make a valid point.
It does it several times. Like there's a bit where there's a station with like a radio station and a fire station, and the key is just behind a secret wall in the radio station. Even early on the third level, the one with the strip club, there's a key hidden behind the bar in a drawer at crouch level height.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, and I knew where these were. Like I remembered where these were, but I still remember when I was a kid spending heaps of time running around. So yeah, it's a problem. And I think it's something that Medieval and Dusk and even Iron Fury do much better. They put the keys in obvious spots, and they have all the secrets there for cool optional stuff. And that's the way it always should be.
Oh, absolutely agreed. And so dovetailing off of this and talking a little bit more about the level design just in general, there's some things that I wanted to touch on here, which I find interesting that to me, it almost seems like, and this is tying back to what we mentioned towards the beginning of the episode where I said I felt like this was the inverse of how Doom kind of did things. I feel like 3D Realms kind of buried the lead here, as it were, when it comes to level design in this game. And you can be 100% free to totally tell me I'm full of shit here, but I really felt like the first episode of this game, by and large, from a level design standpoint, actually felt pretty uninspired. And this is why I'm going to say that. There are a lot of levels that feel like they are composed of just like a set piece. So like the theater, for example. And then there's just a collection of more like nondescript alleyways and streets around it. And so I got this feeling like I was being shepherded from one, like, look at this cool thing, to the next with a lot of dead space in the middle. And I didn't feel like this changed until right around the San Andreas Fault area. To me, that's when the level design actually started to get interesting, because that one in particular showcases how the team uses the build engine to allow for transformation of a level in a way that Doom really didn't do all that much of. So it was something that was different. When you trigger that earthquake during that level, and suddenly these vast portions of the level shift, and you now have this totally new path to go down to finish the rest of the level. To me, that was the point where I was like, oh, okay, this is doing something interesting now. But up until that point, I don't know. It felt, like I said, I've already said it, so I don't like repeating words, but it really just did feel kind of uninspired to me. Like, it felt like the game was leaning on its shock value to carry it through those early levels, because frankly, and I'm going to get to this in a little bit, I feel like they front loaded this game with a lot of that shit. And that's probably because of the shareware. So you get that first episode to really hook people in with strippers, and then they can play the rest of the game. I don't know. That was the sense that I got. I don't know how you guys felt about this.
I felt the same.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
I mean, I know I don't want to expound. I'm not expounding too much, but
stellar contribution.
I can't expound on much. I felt the exact same way Shane did. It's not, I don't know. I'm not going to rant and ramble on. Patrick.
So I guess what I'd say about this is probably one aspect of the game that has aged very poorly. Mm-hmm. But at the time that this game released, Duke Nukem's 3D, I guess, set piece of a theater blew people's fucking minds. Mm-hmm. Like, and that might seem strange that something as ordinary as the kind of bland and kind of empty depiction of a theater was so revolutionary. But prior to Duke 3D, most levels in first-person shooters were very abstracted.
Right.
They didn't really feel like real places. I mean, you look at Doom 2's city levels, and they're, in addition to being some of the shittiest levels,
terrible. Yeah,
they don't come close to a city. Marathon did a depiction of a space station, inside a meteor. System Shock 1 did a little bit of a better job, but those spaces are still very abstract.
Sure.
Duke 3D, you can look at those places and you can say, yes, this feels like a movie theater. The impact that has today is obviously basically non-existent, and I would say most people wouldn't even know that this was like a thing that amazed people back in the day. For me at the time, it was incredible. For me today, I guess I more appreciated the fact that there was a degree of immersion, because it felt like I was jumping around a real place. Like, I did like how, for example, in the theater, you do have the bathroom, you've got the concession stand, you've got the projector room, you've got the theater, with the film screen that you can blow up and go behind it. It did feel semi-realistic to me, but this could very easily be my nostalgia talking. And I agree with you that from at least a gameplay perspective, it's not until episode 3 that it really hits its stride in terms of making these interesting gameplay spaces to play in. Episode 1, it's still fairly static, as you said. So basically, that's all to say that from a modern perspective, I basically agree with you. And I think episode 3 is above and beyond the first 2 episodes in terms of quality. Mm-hmm. I'm much lower on episode 2 than you guys. I felt like there was an overabundance of those fucking sentries to the point where I almost wanted to stop playing in episode 2. But it does pick up towards the end with the lunar station levels.
Yeah.
Here's where I'll kind of finish my thoughts on the gameplay, is that because I wasn't a PC player and because I didn't play this game, like, my nostalgia towards early FPS games is really more so with GoldenEye, and I'm probably going to be devastated when I have to play this again later because that's coming down the pipe. But like, you say all these things about being in a movie theater and how it was revolutionary at the time. And I look at GoldenEye and I'm thinking to myself, well, these are really well designed levels with really believable kind of environments that you're talking to with Duke Nukem 3D. Mm. So when I look at it, and I understand GoldenEye is a year later, it probably took a lot from Duke Nukem 3D. I mean, it had to have by the point it came out. But I just think when you look at a little over a year later and you see something much better designed on a system that is typically not known for these things, And I'm not even talking about games like other games I haven't played, like Hexen or whatever else was coming out around that time. You get to a point where like, yeah, it's nice and it's unique. It's not an imaginative version of hell. It's not just an endless corridor of just, a Nazi barracks or whatever the hell you're doing in Wolf 3D. Because that's only really the only two games that were out around this time, right? Because it's also before Quake.
Marathon and System Shock are the other two that come to mind in terms of FPS spaces. But yeah, this was the first breakout semi-realistic location one.
Yeah. And I haven't played Marathon or System Shock, and I hope to remedy at least System Shock. But when you're a console player and you go back and you play this, I know I say keep the nostalgia glasses on a little bit. I guess I am, but applying it in a fucked up way. It's harder for me to look at these locations as you are relatively comparing them to what was going on at the time, just because when I was getting environments, I was getting Turok. I was getting GoldenEye. And looking at this doesn't make anything special compared to those two games, even though I think technically on some point, with the exception of GoldenEye, and I'm probably going to be very, very wrong about this, it's a better game.
You're definitely wrong about GoldenEye. I just want to say I played that game last year and it fucking sucked.
I'm about to find out.
I've heard much better things about Turok though, so I'll let that memory at least survive.
I'm going to find out, but like I said, technically I think Nukem 3D is a better game than either of those two games, but I just think everything else about those two games is more inspired, more streamlined, and better designed. But again, I'm going to find out otherwise, because nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and I'm riding nostalgia for those other two games, and I'm using recency bias for Duke Nukem 3D. So I will say that. And that's where I'm just going to leave it off on the gameplay point.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? I will concede a point, because Patrick actually brought up a good point here. And that is the level of interactivity. I think I might have been overlooking that a little bit, but it should be noted, because when you are comparing Duke Nukem to a lot of its contemporaries at the time, having that ability to interact with just so many different things in a level. And I mean, it seems fucking dumb now, right? Because you're like, oh, Duke can pee in a toilet, like, but that didn't happen before, right? So
right.
There is something to be said for that, and interacting with relatively large pieces of the level, like revealing the movie theater screen with the chick on it, and
of course
stuff like that. I mean, yeah. So you know what? That actually is an excellent point. I think what I was getting at more of is just the actual design of how the levels are laid out overall. I felt like that got consistently better the further you got into the game. And I guess the last thing that I at least want to touch on, because unsurprisingly, the gameplay portion of the discussion is the one that's going to run a little bit longer, I think, than the rest. But I just wanted to expand a little bit on the point that I made and see if you guys had anything you wanted to add to it. That was I the only one that just felt like this game was tonally very inconsistent? Like the first episode, again, shareware, but that was very much like a check out all of these tits and like the porno mags strewn around everywhere. And like, oh man, isn't this so controversial? And it kind of like blows that proverbial wad like right away. And then,
of course, you have to use that.
Of course I do. It's yes. But then the rest of the game, to me at least, felt a lot more like a standard fight aliens in space kind of affair, which seemed odd, given that 3D Realms themselves specifically stated that they wanted to make something that was categorically not that.
Yeah, I mean, episode 3 does feature an abortion clinic in extremely poor taste. So they tap into it a little bit.
Fair.
But episode 1, I mean, you are right. It does lean more into the direct titillation. And I think that you're completely correct on that point.
I don't care.
Fair enough.
I think just to put it, because you're all right, it is over the top. It is supposed to be shareware. But that's always how it works. I mean, there's so many games where it brings you in with its over the topness and it's just absurdity. And then it just becomes more of a traditional, a more traditional game within its own genre, because at the end of the day, that's what you're really trying to make, right? You're trying to make a good game.
I mean, sure, but I just feel like if that was the selling point, I feel weird for even arguing for this, but like, I feel like they should have just kept carrying that on through the rest of the game. Like, just really continue leaning into your fucking shtick instead of like almost doing a little bit of a bait and switch where it's just like, oh, look how fucking edgy this is. And then the other 2 episodes of the game are just like, you're on a space station.
But I don't think it's that edgy. I don't think the first episode is that. I understand in 96 it was.
Comparatively. Yeah.
But I don't think it's that terribly edgy. I think you spend a lot of your time not doing edgy shit and not doing crazy stuff because you are on Earth. So you think on Earth, yeah, there's strippers and all these things like this on Earth when you go into strip clubs and porno sites, but then you don't. And if 3D Realms didn't want to do that and they did, oh well. But you say it's totally inconsistent with their overall view. I say it's consistent with the flow of the plot, even if it's not tonally consistent with what they're aiming to do in episode 1.
I also think you're maybe underestimating the impact of having naked women in cocoons and basically chained to the walls.
I suppose
surrounded
that's
by
true.
green goo, because that shit nowadays, like, it doesn't even register a blink with how low resolution it is. But at the time, there was tremendous shock value in that kind of, depiction of basically women held in bondage.
Right.
Yep.
So while I kind of get what you're getting at, I don't think it strays to. I think that, yes, it takes a bit of a backseat to how full on it was going in like literally the first 3 levels. But I think that it remains from start to finish.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Speaking about things that remain from start to finish, because I think we've talked about the gameplay long enough here. Let's talk about how this game has held up graphically. And I think I'm going to start off on this one because I've only played the 20th Anniversary Edition and the Saturn Edition. So I don't think I have much to speak about the original one. And I say it holds up great for a game from this era. I think it still looks good. But again, I'm getting the souped up version. So I'll have to defer to you two on how the original one holds up. I'll shift over to Patrick here. Patrick, how do you think this game holds up today in terms of graphics, and how does it look?
So this is probably one of the hardest things for me to objectively evaluate because I played this game for years when I was younger, right?
Right.
I have to say, I really like the look of this game. I think that one of the things that really stands out about it is how colorful it is. Mm-hmm. Like you're playing this game and you get such a huge array of color palettes, which is one of the big things that distinguish it from Quake, which released just a few months later. And listen, I love Quake's aesthetic. I love its commitment to establishing an atmosphere. But that game is like shades of brown and blue and dark green the entire way from start to finish.
Yeah.
It was ahead of its time.
It was, yeah.
It's Gears of War before Gears of War.
I really don't think that's a bad thing, by the way. Like, I'm not here to bash on Quake. I think that Quake's music and color palette does lend it a particular atmosphere that's pretty damn good, one I actually enjoy. But Duke 3D, I think a big part of its ability to sell the places that exist is its commitment to color, and color is a huge part of helping establish its personality. I think the game looks great, particularly the enemies you fight still look fantastic to me to this day. Although I still don't quite know what an enforcer actually looks like, whether it's meant to be a bug person or what. But that's because I had to fucking kill those chain gunner guys almost immediately or I'd get torn to shreds.
Fair. Yeah, I think I would probably just echo a lot of the same sentiments. I think one of the nice things about this era of FPS is that it benefits from straddling that line between old 2D era and then fully 3D polygonal games. Whereas, as we've brought up multiple times on this show, that first wave of polygonal titles maybe doesn't hold up super well.
Speaking of GoldenEye.
Right, exactly. Yeah. When your character model consists of a grand total of like 6 polygons, it tends to look like shit. Build engine games and other ones of this era still look decent today because you get that, pseudo 3-dimensional environment. So you still get a lot of texture work there, which was done very well. And then you also get your 2D sprites for, all of your enemies, your items, as well as your own hands and weapons. And all of those things were done extremely well. So to that point, granted, I also have a whole lot of nostalgia that's going into this for this era of FPS, but I think that they do still benefit from the same thing that a lot of 2-dimensional sprite-based games get to benefit from, which is that they age actually pretty gracefully, all things considered. All right, so I think that pretty much covers the discussion regarding how this game was presented visually. But of course, we like to talk about the auditory component of the games that we discuss. And so let's touch a little bit on the soundtrack and the sound design that went into Duke Nukem. So I'm actually going to go ahead and have Chris start off with this one. So what were your thoughts on how Duke Nukem sounds?
I actually didn't notice any of the music at all. I know it was there, and when it was there, I didn't think of anything negative about it. Mm-hmm. I didn't think anything positive about it. In fact, like doing research for this episode, apparently the title song Grab Bag was supposed to be one of the most notable songs from this game. So much to the point that like Megadeth made a studio recording of it, a cover of it. I don't know. I just wasn't terribly impressed by it, but I'm just not terribly impressed by a lot of first person shooters in terms of their music, except for maybe Doom, because it's just always in your face. And that wasn't the case here. It seems like it tried to be atmospheric without being atmospheric. I don't know. It's kind of like one of those feelings I get with it. It's like it's there because it needs to be there, and it's not intrusive. So that's good enough. And I can appreciate that. But in terms of the other sound design, I didn't have an issue with it. I think the rest of the sound design was fantastic in terms of how the guns sounded, in terms of how enemies fell, in terms of what Duke had to say. I know you said it gets repetitive, but I didn't think so. I thought every single time he spoke, it was fine. I didn't think it was weird every single time you paused the game that he made a grunt or some weird sound came out, but whatever. It's just part of it. I do like the fact that when you're trying to look for secret areas, he kind of makes fun of you. Yeah. He says like, oh, where is it? Like, oh, okay. So you know exactly what's going on because this happens all the time in all these other first person shooter games of this era. But I do appreciate the voice work. I think John St. John did a fantastic job as Duke. I think all the enemies make fantastic noises when you kill them. So there's not really any complaints I have about it. It's not stellar, but it does the job more than adequately. And so I gotta put it on that. So good job to it. I like it.
That is a solid middle of the road assessment.
I know, right? It's right there.
Well, I'll just go ahead and get my thoughts out of the way. We'll let Patrick kind of wrap this portion. So I agree that I think the music is fine. They were going for a little bit more of an atmospheric approach in a lot of these levels. And some of them actually were very evocative of the more atmospheric tracks that you got from Doom, at least to me. They sounded fairly similar in a lot of ways, which is not a bad thing. It was surprisingly not necessarily as in your face as one might expect, especially with how bombastic Duke himself is as a personality. But I think for the most part, it works. As far as the sound design is concerned, I actually had, well, really one issue. The rest of it, I think, was solid, pretty competent. I liked all of the gun sound effects. I will say that I do, tying back to what I said earlier about feel, some of them I do feel like I wish that they had a little more chutzpah in there, like maybe a little more bass or something. It needed something, because I felt like there wasn't as much impact on a lot of those weapons as I would have liked, but they were fine. The one thing that I wanted to point out that was just, it got me every single time, and I don't know why this is, but I don't recall what the name of them are, but the floating head creatures that shoot those like glowing projectiles at you.
Octobrains?
Sure, that's probably it. Yeah. Their sound effects are like noticeably louder than every other enemy in the whole game. And I don't know why that's true. But oh boy, if you're playing this game with headphones on, which I was for most of it, I had it at a pretty, comfortable level for pretty much everything else in the game. And then anytime one of these motherfuckers came along and shot it, it was like I was getting my eardrums blown out. So there was a balancing issue there. Outside of that, I really don't have that many complaints. I don't know. What about you, Patrick? What were your thoughts?
Honestly, when it comes to music, I basically agree with you. The music was a lot more understated than I remembered. And I think that a large part of that is that the title track is a rock piece. Like you can hear the electric guitars slamming. And whenever I fire it up, whenever I think of Duke 3D, it's that one that I think of. Then again, to the actual game, and as you said, it's much closer to Doom's track, a lot more pensive and moody as you move through, which is different from what the modern take on boomer shooters does. Like if you play Dusk, Nightmare Reaper, even amid evil, their soundtracks are far, far more bombastic, you know, whether it's slamming you with electric guitars or there's just a lot more going on orchestrally. So like you guys, a lot of the time I wasn't even aware that the music was playing, probably because the sound effects are so large. When it comes to sound, yeah, I think it does a good job. The one sound effect that I want to elevate on a pedestal is the basic troopers. If you killed them, but only barely, I don't quite know how it works, but if you're not giving them, if you're kind of like doing a little bit of damage to them, they kind of get down on their knees and they're like, wuk, 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 as their head shakes back and forth, you know, their lungs obviously filling with blood. And I've always loved that animation and sound effect as they violently and horrifically eventually die and collapse onto the ground. So big fan of that. Big fan of that sound effect. But yeah, I think middle of the road is a good place to land on Duke 3D sound.
Well, that's just the perfect opportunity to run up and mighty foot them right in the face.
Exactly. Yeah. Very satisfying to do so.
Activated.
The other one is if you shoot them, if they kind of like take enough damage, they'll fall from the sky they're jetpacking around, and then they fall onto the ground with a sickening crack, and that kills them. Once again, very satisfying. I hope you don't find any of this is revealing anything too disturbing about my personality, but I'm a big fan of this ultra violence in video games, and I think Duke 3D does a pretty good job glorifying it.
I actually agree with you. I am with your personality, so maybe we're all disturbed, and the people listening to us need to be very, very afraid.
Perhaps.
Nah, they're into it.
Yeah, we do have a dick dragon. All right. So we have some miscellaneous stuff that we want to talk about before we close this show out. Patrick, you have some things you would like to share about this game, so why don't you go ahead and tell us some miscellaneous information about Duke Nukem 3D?
I guess the only real piece of miscellaneous information I have is kind of not directly about Duke 3D, but it's what I view as the spiritual successor to this game, the modern version of Duke 3D. If you want to try something a bit more streamlined and modern before going back to the old, or if you enjoyed the old and want to try something new, and that's Iron Fury. Iron Fury, it's a spiritual successor to Duke 3D and Build Engine games. It's made by 3D Realms. I'm not sure how many of the original team are involved, but clearly at least some of them, because remarkably in today's day and age, they were still using the bloody Build Engine. And what they achieve with Iron Fury and the Build Engine beggars belief. The Build Engine is a piece of janky crap. Like, it really is. They basically were able to simulate 3D space by putting shitloads of teleporters all over the place. So when you're playing in these supposedly 3D spaces, you're just constantly moving through teleporters, and sometimes it's noticeable, sometimes it's not. I think Iron Fury dramatically improves on the gunplay of Duke 3D. I think that in some cases, it does lose the brilliant compact level design of the game, but it does trade off by having, you know, card keys that are far easier to find. So even though the levels are much larger and expansive to brawl in, it's much easier to move and flow through these levels a little bit less confusing. I think Iron Fury is a great game. If you like Duke 3D or are kind of put off by the older take on it, Iron Fury will be a fantastic experience from start to finish, and I highly recommend it. Have either of you dabbled in it at all?
I was just going to say I wholeheartedly second that. I actually played Ion Fury on our stream, I think a month or two ago now.
Cool.
You did, yeah.
Yeah. So no, definitely a solid game for sure. So if you have any affection for boomer shooters, or if you just want to check it out, as Patrick said, and you don't want to go all the way back, it's a fantastic entry point. For sure.
I can't echo anything because I am scum and I hate first person. All right. So for my miscellaneous stuff, I'm just going to kind of bring up some interesting things that I found is that this game got 10 expansion packs.
So many.
Yes. Nuke It, Duke It Out in DC, Duke Caribbean, Life's a Beach, Duke Nuclear Winter, Duke Zone and Zone 2, Duke Extreme, Duke Assault, Duke Nukem's Penthouse Paradise, and Duke It's 0 Hour, which apparently was made by people at 0 Hour, whatever that is. I'm sure you two know. So this game has been repackaged 10 times just for the PC version. And those versions are the Plutonium Pack, also known as the Atomic Edition, the Mac version, because, you know, Mac's just a repackaging because it's not a real PC anyway.
True.
East Meets West, Duke the Apocalypse Part 1 and 2, a Killathon Collection, the GOG version, which doesn't exist anymore, which, you know, I'll probably talk about whether it holds up today. which kind of pissed me off because it got delisted in 2015, the Megaton Edition, the Kiloton 2015 collection, and the 20th Anniversary World Tour Edition, which is the only version you can legally obtain today. So yeah, this game, like 3D Realms, has tapped the shit out of it. It's probably made them a ton of money. I can't necessarily blame them, but yeah, there's that. Shane?
Yeah, I've actually got one thing. I did not put it in our notes, but I did find it interesting because it was something that I remember thinking about back then when I first played this, and also apparently totally forgot about, and then thought of it all over again when I was playing it again for the show. And that was, is there a way to actually save the babes? Because in Duke Nukem, you can't really actually save the ones that are like, you know, trapped in goo or chained up or whatever. You basically just need to put them out of their misery by shooting them in the face.
Yeah, I kick them.
And the answer to that is most of the time, no, unless you are playing the Nintendo 64 version. I'm not sure if that was like a concession that they made for Nintendo or some shit where they were just like, well, you need to be able to save the babes. You can't just murder them in cold blood. So in that version of the game, and perhaps one other one, I can't recall, but definitely the N64 version, you do have the ability to save them. So fun fact.
Hooray, saving babes.
The only thing I'd mention about all of the different versions and everything is the way I played the game was there's a source port called eDuke32. Mm-hmm. And all you have to do is obtain, you know, a totally legitimate copy of the Duke 3D, the equivalent of the WAD, put it in that source port, you know, folder, and then you can play the game. I think it's whatever version of the game you choose. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'd highly recommend all our listeners do. Obtain your 100% legitimate copy of that WAD, put it in the eDukes32's folder, and then you're good to go. And the experience will be wonderful.
True. I was fortunate, I guess, enough to have bought the Megaton edition on Steam before that got also delisted. So that is the version that I happened to play this time around. It included a lot of extras and stuff that I'm not sure were available in other versions and is not available for purchase anymore. So that's fun.
And if you want to listen to a wonderful content creator go over these games, I highly recommend Civvy. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Civvy, but he does a lot of YouTube videos on these old boomer shooters. Big fan of his content, and he's done a video on each of the Duke 3D episodes.
How do you spell Civvy?
Civvie.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about it, he's big into the history of these games and breaking them down in great detail. So I recommend his stuff.
Good deal. I guess this is the time that we are going to close out this show, and we're going to discuss whether or not this holds up today. So, Shane, I'm going to have you kick it off before our guest, Patrick, has the final word. So, Shane, does Duke Nukem 3D hold up today?
Well, issues with actually obtaining a copy of the game aside, because that's sort of a thing in its own right. But as Patrick mentioned, there are ways to do that. Does it hold up? Is it something that somebody could go back and play today and have a good time? I would say yes. I don't know. I guess I would say yes to a lot of FPSs in this era, just because, I mean, I'm biased, of course, but to me, I still think that they're a lot of fun to play. And to Patrick's earlier point, when we were talking about how this game feels when you play it, it's something that was lost along the way in developers' constant, effort to try to make things feel more realistic. In some cases, I guess that's fine. But, I don't know about the rest of you, but part of the reason I play video games is to get out of reality. So if I can slide around a level at superhuman speed and jump twice the height that any normal man can jump, I am totally fucking for that. And that's a part of the reason why a lot of these older shooters are just so fun to go back and play. I am glad that there are a lot of more modern takes on this. I actually just played one called Hellbound on our stream fairly recently. I think I got it in a bundle, probably the Boomer Shooter bundle, unsurprisingly. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a style of gameplay, particularly in first-person shooters, that I think is really underrepresented nowadays. And I think we would do well to have more of it because it's just fun. And ultimately, I think that's what's most important. And issues aside with, maybe some pacing, some level design things, stuff like that, on the whole, Duke Nukem is still fun to play. And so for those reasons, I would say yes, I think it still holds up.
So this is how I'm going to start this out. I hate first-person shooters, so everything I'm about to say, take with a grain of salt. And my initial statement on whether or not Duke Nukem 3D holds up is I have no fucking idea, because you can't get the original game anywhere. Because I had to play the 20th anniversary edition, because everywhere else I went, I couldn't find a copy. It's not on GOG, it's not on Steam, and of course you can't play an old game on a modern PC with original media, assuming that your PC even has the capability to accept original media. So in many ways, I can't say whether or not it does. I can tell you the closest thing I've experienced to playing the original is the version on the Saturn, which was masterfully crafted by Lobotomy Software. And I can tell you that game sure as shit has not held up, and you need to stay far the fuck away from that piece of shit. It was probably great when it first came out, but the fact that you can't save unless you're at the very end of the level, or, there's the precision shooting and the fact that you don't have a dual analog controller. Yeah, it sucks. Now, in terms of the 20th anniversary collection, I'm going to give it a soft yes. And here's the reason. It's because they put in so much time and love and crafting to make sure that Duke Nukem 3D is playable today. So if you die, you can rewind to a spot that you're comfortable starting back off of. In fact, that's the first option they give you. If you die, they have the entire time that you've been in the level, and you can go back to a spot where you were at, like on a time signature, and start playing it again. The controls are mapped to modern control situations. There's a lot of additional features and quality of life improvements that they've made to the game that you can play it. So in its most modern iteration, which is the 20th anniversary edition, which is on Steam, which all you have to do is wait for a sale and pay for $2 for it instead of the absurd $20 it's asking from you for this 25-year-old game, which probably should be about $5 on GOG, which apparently it's not. You will have a pretty good time. Yes, I have my issues with the level design, which is why I give it a soft yes. I don't like looking for key cards. I don't like looking for switches. I don't like enemies that somehow can immediately track onto me and shoot me before I even know what to do with a shotgun that needs to be precise. And if I'm just a cunt hair off, I'm fucking dead. I don't like that. But I am terrible at first-person shooters, and I realize other people are much better than I am. And if I'm recommending this to a first-person shooter fan, I would have to say yes. The most modern iteration of Duke Nukem 3D holds up. It does hold up today. Can't speak to the original, but I will say the one that was closest to it fucking sucks. That's all I have. It's take it as you will on my opinion. So Patrick, you got the final word.
So on balance with this game, I would recommend it, yes. Although it's interesting, after playing through it, it ranks a bit lower in terms of my rankings of these FPS games from this era. I would put it below Plutonia Experiment, I'd put it below Quake, and I'd put it below Blood after playing through that. And I think that a large part of that is due to the basic fundamental gameplay of Duke 3D, shooting guys and using the weapons, which just wasn't as fun as I was hoping. It was pretty good. I had a pretty decent time with it. But in terms of moving around, shooting enemies and all that kind of stuff, it just falls a little flat compared to those titles, where I think Duke 3D still excels to this day. And this is finding secret access key cards aside, which I recognize as a legitimate complaint, something that obviously I didn't struggle with as much because I remembered the levels. I think that Duke 3D does a fantastic job with its level design, fitting an enormous amount of dense, interesting encounters into a fairly small space. And I really love how the levels kind of wrap in on themselves with shortcuts that open either because you obtain an item or because a wall blows up, you see a vent and it takes you to an area you haven't been before, because a wall slides open, giving a new perspective on the terrain. I think it does a lot to put a lot of interesting stuff within a very small space, which I think is the best way to do these kinds of FPS games. So does it have its issues? Is it a little bit more medium than I remembered? Yes, but the fundamentals are so good. The movement around the levels, the shooting's pretty good. The level design is great that I can easily recommend this today. It's a good game and you'll enjoy playing it even, more than 25 years later.
All right. And what's funny is that truth be told, with, cards on the table, I was initially prepared to come into this episode and totally shit on this game.
Whoa.
After spending more time playing through more of it again, going through the whole thing again, because it'd been a while, and then taking a moment to really reflect on it. That's kind of where I landed with where I am now. I didn't think I was going to end this episode by recommending it, but I did.
Same.
So, all right. Well, that kind of wraps our discussion for Duke Nukem 3D. So before we launch into our typical spiel, we always like to give our esteemed guest a moment to let the folks know at home where they can be found. So, Patrick, what is it that you do on the internet and where can people find you?
Well, firstly, I just want to thank you guys so much for having me on the show. We had you on the show not too long ago for Diablo 2, which was an awesome episode, one that's going really well. So I really appreciate that. I value the opportunity to be able to talk about this game here. It's one that I am somewhat nostalgic for, so I was always scared of doing it for my show and having it torn apart and having to tear apart it myself. It's a really, really great opportunity. So thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you.
What we do is we're called the Retro Spectives Podcast. We do something similar to the Retro Hangover, although perhaps even more critically. We throw our nostalgia goggles in the trash and we play classic games of the past with the intention of doing like deep dive critiques on them to see if they've stood the test of time. I'd say there's like two main things that I really like about our show. The first is when we get to tear things people love to shreds as they rightfully deserve to be done, because people do live in nostalgia bubbles a lot of time. But even more than that, I love identifying when these old games still have lessons that, maybe have been forgotten to history. And I can think of no better example of a game that does that than Resident Evil. I know Resident Evil isn't some underground franchise, but I played it for the first time a year ago. And on paper, it's like a list of some of the worst design decisions combined. It's got tank controls. It's got a fixed camera. It's got a limited inventory system, like a ridiculously limited inventory system, 6 items. Saves are tied to items. It's got like multiple different key types that you need to carry around if you want to have access to the place. On paper, it's a disaster. And in fact, moving forwards, games eschewed these systems. They said, we've moved on from this. But Resident Evil is one of the best games I've played in my entire life, because all of those things come together to form something incredible. And discovering that about a game that old that no one has really emulated today was something wonderful. So we do love critiquing these old games, but we also do love discovering when these games do something special. And Resident Evil was, without a doubt, one of the most special experiences of my gaming life. So if you want to come check us out, if that sounds like something you'd be keen on, all of our content is on our website, which is rspodcast.net. And hopefully these guys are kind enough to chuck a link in the show notes to it. And yeah, come check us out. We've got all our social media stuff, rspodcast.net.
Fantastic. And I will say that you would be doing yourselves a disservice if you don't check out their show, because it is quality. And not only that, if you do head over to their website, which will be in the show notes, you also get the bonus of having a lot of really great written content they put together too. They had a fantastic article about Diablo that I very much enjoyed. And I will say that I also was thoroughly pleased to be on the show for the Diablo 2 discussion, because I really liked getting both of your perspectives on it. It was a refreshing take. So I really had a good time. So I would highly suggest people go check that out as well. And as far as we are concerned, if you are here, then that means that you found us. So hello, welcome. We're glad that you're here.
Hi.
If you'd like to engage with the show outside of just letting it sort of pass into your ear holes, then you can do that. And not only that, but we make it easy for you. You can head on over to Linktree/Retro Hangover to check out all of the RHP related destinations, whether that happens to be our socials or our YouTube channel or the Patreon or merch store, if you would like to support the show in that fashion, as well as the Twitch streams. So, Chris, what do we do on Twitch?
So if you're paying attention to our Twitch streams, you know we play a lot of Lunar, which I think is Patrick's favorite game.
That's what I heard, yeah.
Oh my God. Let's listen, if you don't mind, I'll put the link to my Lunar article in the show notes as well. I'll probably be instantly hated by about half of your listeners, but maybe the other half will be on my side. So I'll take half.
That's fair. Okay.
If you want to go to twitch.tv/retro hangover, you can find out whether or not Shane's going to agree with Patrick, because we play a lot of Lunar there. Or if we're not playing Lunar, we're playing something that relates to just gaming in general or playing something. So twitch.tv/retro hangover. Over on Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern time. That's US. Twitch.tv/retro hangover for Sunday streams at 9 p.m. Eastern time. US. I hope to see you there.
Fantastic. And I suppose, with all of that being said, until next time.
Play with your, do I really got to make a joke for Duke Nukem 3D joystick thing? Joysticks.
Don't have time to play with myself.
Keep that in.